All right, I think we're live. We should be live now.
Can't see anything at our end.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. It's slightly different to what we do normally. It's completely different, actually. What happens is we use a program called Restream to normally broadcast on YouTube, on Facebook, and it holds all of our PowerPoints and all of our, videos and everything, and it's wonderful. We do an entrance video and the lot. That's crashed out on us. It isn't. I thought originally it was just our problem because I'm in a place tonight a little bit different, as you can see. We're over in Norfolk. And I thought it was just because of the Wi-Fi. And it's not just because of the Wi-Fi, because Sam also couldn't get on board. It's the whole program. And so we had to scratch our heads and think, what now? What we've actually done is we're currently running this through Zoom. And that actually linked to an exciting update that I have in just a moment. But we have no idea how this is going to work. I don't even know if we're able to access the live stream questions, although Sam, I don't know if you're on that.
I've got it up. It's ready for questions, just in case we get any. But it does seem like it's coming through fine.
All right, so we can still carry on doing the questions, and so send your questions in. We're joined tonight by John Mackay in the very beautiful and sunny Queensland. Are you still in, John?
I'm still in. Can you see me on screen with beautiful silky oak trees behind me? And you're liable to hear our famous Aussie perfume going, because we have lots of mosquitoes around out there. And we've got lots of things this morning.
Good stuff. And we're also, of course, joined by Diane. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks, Joseph. Good to be back.
Good, great stuff, great stuff. All right, well, I think we should dive straight in, because John, you have to leave in about half an hour or so. So I think we should dive straight in with John's presentation, and then pretty soon after that, we'll have a Q&A session before John has to disappear. But we've each got a little section to talk about tonight. It's sort of a nice kind of, mild chat, see what's going on, how's everything doing, stuff like that. Give you a few exciting updates as well. So send your questions in. If you have any questions, we'll try and deal with them later as we go. But Lord willing, we're back to normal next week. So John, over to you. I've got the PowerPoint all ready to go whenever you need it up. So
okay, good. Just to explain things, I've got a big field trip at Jurassic Ark today. Some 40 people out there looking at the rocks and the fossils and all of our botanic gardens and all the things that Joseph Hubbard eats his heart out to try and have over there in England. But they've got things we don't have, like archaeology and all of that at the museum that's coming up. All right, let me just swap the picture here a moment, and we'll reverse it here. Can you actually see that piece of petrified wood? This is from Jurassic Ark, and Jurassic, theoretically, according to the evolutionists, 150 million years of age. But can you see the black bits on the front? That's because we did an experiment. When I dug it up 2 weeks ago, which you're about to see on screen, it looked like it was still wood inside the tree. So we decided to burn it. Joseph, would you put the screens up, please, mate?
Absolutely. Let me just share my screen. I've got it all up in the PowerPoint, so it should all be nice and easy and ready to go if everything works. Okay, that should be showing about now. You can see there's our screen, and if I just go across, if I can make it work.
All this new technology takks a while for you young blokes.
It's completely frozen on me. Oh, there we go. That seems to be working. There we go. There's you, John. So
there's yours truly on the job. We've just dug up a new Jurassic log at Jurassic Ark. We've got 10 hectares of these things and lots more besides. And we just found this one. So next slide, Joseph, is me just picking a piece out. If you can transfer that to the next slide. And there's no doubt about it, this is the piece I have in my hand. It's fossil wood, supposedly up to 150 million years old. Supposedly the older they get, the more silica and more stone-like they became. Remember, petrified means turned to stone. Next one. So we decided to get our gas burner out. Now, see the blue flame? That's a methane flame, and it can be, nearly 1,000 degrees. But can you see what's happening to the piece of petrified wood? It's going bright orange. By the way, that doesn't mean it's burning. It means it might be burning, but it's also reached over 700 degrees. It's red hot, and there's a little bit of yellow hot in it as well, 700 or 800 degrees there. So next slide, Joseph. We decided to run this all over. So if you've got good eyes, you'll see me in the top left-hand corner. You'll see the piece of wood being evicted from its home in the right-hand corner. And down in the bottom, can you see the yellow flame coming out? Because this is burning wood. When you have a look, it's not just actually a piece of red-hot petrified wood. It's actually wood that's on fire. And we've shipped this around to people, and we've got all sorts of suggestions about it and further experiments to do. But there's no doubt about it, we had some original unpetrified wood. So the old story, the longer the coal stays in the ground, the higher quality it is. All of those sort of things turn out to be nonsense. The wood is still there. And of course, there's a young man in England who might like to get his hand on some of these and test for the DNA and see if that's still inside the cells, because we know from the petrified wood that we've sectioned, the cell structure is actually still there. And next one, Joseph.
I think this might be the video. Let's see if we can play it. Anything you want to say about the video before we play
so
it?
We took another section and we lit this and videoed it. So away you go, Joseph. You can see there it's red hot and almost white hot. White hot's really hot indeed. Can you see the little spurt coming off the end? That's gas, and the gas is going to do something because it's got some bits in it that have been ejected. And you see the orange color? It's caught fire. Now, this is the thing burning. This is wood burning. This is standard wood color because we actually took a piece of wood and burnt it to check what color it burns. And we got all sorts of questions going out there as to why does wood burn orange and when it's on fire. Maybe it's to do with the sodium that's still inside it, because wood actually needs sodium as well as calcium to get growing properly. Okay, Joseph, take that off. So we've got a great day coming up at Jurassic Ark. We're going to show the people these experiments, including this one. There's my offsider, Clem. Clem's a highly qualified engineer and one of those who helps us work this strata machine, which I designed and which several guys built, and we make it work. Now, it's really designed, and Joseph has seen the last version of this, it's designed to make layers, like in the sedimentary layers, because we're all told the layers form slowly, one on top of the other. Next slide, Joseph. Okay, now this is just yesterday in Australia, which is today in England. It's a funny world we live in. Now, do you see the black stuff and the white stuff? Can you see the layers? Now, I remember learning Nicholas Steno's principles of superposition, including the bottom layer gets there first, including that you can't lay down anything laid higher than sort of 30 degrees. But you're quite right, that's about 45 degrees. Now, if you've got good eyes, well, let's flick to the next one and help them if they don't. Can you see that marvelous twirly-whirly strata in the middle? And you look at that and say, what on earth is it? Looks like an artist has actually twirled the sand around. But this formed in the strata as we were doing it. Next one, Joseph. Now you can see the bubbles being dragged along the top. The water is coming in one side. It's bringing in a mixture of rutile sand and ordinary sand, and immediately it separates them into white and black layers. The black stuff is heavier, but what's interesting is the black stuff always ends up on top. Amazing contradiction of Steno's principles. In fact, if we go one step further, we're just about at the end of this little experiment. Okay, there we are close up, and you have a look at this one here. Can you see the marvelous twirly-whirly thing? Whoops, what happened there, Joseph?
Sorry, we went one step too far. There we go. There's the twirly-whirly thing.
Okay, so what you ought to be thinking of here is how did that twirly-whirly thing get there? But if you get close up, yeah, there we are. So for those of you who are used to thinking strata form one on top of the other and the bottom layer gets there first, you might be interested in a clue. We discovered that the actual layers in the water actually some of them can be running backwards while the current is running forward. And what we're looking at here is a build-up as the thing moves backwards. Now, if you see that in the field, you'll scratch your head because it doesn't fit any of Steno's principles. In fact, the majority of Steno's principles turn out to be experimentally wrong. Don't be surprised, because he never did any experiments. He never even did any field work. He just came up with a logical story. And if you accept this story, then the fossils in the bottom layer got there first and lived and died long before the fossils in the top layer. Ponder that twirly-whirly one. Now, Joseph, bring the next one up. The one with the actual layers in the water. Because I noticed as we took pictures of the water, how good are your eyes? Can you see the almost 40 degrees slope on the right-hand side? Can you see in the water on the left-hand side, there's a very distinct lighter layer? Well, what's interesting is it turns out that there's multiple layers in the water. This was something that I suspected, and which a guy who was in charge of a council water depot said every plumber knows there's layers in water. The layers are there before the sediment gets into it. Next one, Joseph. In fact, there's a closer up one. Can you see the bump at the bottom? That's a hill that's formed in the water itself. But if you have a look up the top, you will notice that there are layers, and they're actually not forming a hill. They're actually going at an incline in the water itself. Show them a bit more clearer, Joseph. Get me the next one. Now, how good are your eyes there? Can you see the layers in the water? These layers are already there. And it was really helped by the fact that we had tiny particles of, I guess you could say, micro silt in the water. And the light was coming in from behind. And we cut out all shadows until you could actually see the layers present in the water. The layers are there before the sediment gets into it. So don't be surprised that water forms layers. It forms layers because the sediment is actually not making the layers. The sediment is joining the layers that are already there. So the Grand Canyon doesn't need millions of years to form one layer on top of the other. The bottom layer is already there at the same time as the top layer. Bit of a mystery that, but it's the way water works. Last one, Joseph.
That is it, I'm afraid.
That is it. That's good. Well, I'm pleased to tell you that. But Joseph, if you want to take over from there with your little segment at the moment.
Sure thing. Yeah, I'll do my little bit and a little bit of an update as well, and a few interesting little things. And then I think we'll have a break and throw it open to questions, just in case there have any questions that have come in. So do send them in before we move on to talk about some of our updates from creation research in our creation news, some interesting fun things from Diane there, and we'll see how we go. So let me get my screen back up again, if I can get it up and working.
Just whilst you're doing that, Joe, we've had a super chat in from George Bond.
Excellent,
for 20 Aussie buckaroos, saying Happy New Year, Creation Research. So Happy New Year to you too, George. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much, George. And thank you for tuning in. Let's get this up. That should be up. And there is a lovely picture of me, if it works, which it isn't. There it is. There we go. There's a picture of me. So this picture of me was taken a few days ago. It was actually taken on Tuesday. This Tuesday just gone, and you can see it was a beautiful day. I mean, look at that gorgeous blue sky, and you can see just behind me is a beautiful red brick building. This is actually one of the red brick universities. So if you want a sort of a brief history of universities in the UK, you have the really old ones, the stone brick ones, right? These are the ones like Oxford and Cambridge and St Andrews. These are the really old universities, which date back to medieval times, when really they were sort of for studying theology, or natural theology as it used to be called, was the sciences, right? It was studying how God worked in the world around you. Then in the sort of the 1800s, you had a number of red brick universities built. This one included places like Liverpool and Manchester and or Birmingham, all around there. And then in sort of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you had the white tiled universities, right? The really new ones like the University of East Anglia and the like. And a lot more of those sprung up in the sort of 60s, 70s, and 80s. This is a red brick one, so it's quite an old university. It's sort of mid 1800s. This is actually Liverpool University. What am I doing behind Liverpool University? Well, I'm absolutely thrilled, and it's been a huge blessing to say that I am now a PhD student for the University of Liverpool. It's only really by the providence of God that it's all come about, so I'd appreciate your prayers. We've got a lot of work to do. Professor Steve Taylor, who has agreed to come on Creation Conversations at some point in the next few weeks, so I look forward to having him on. He's actually going to be my supervisor. Now, Steve is involved in a number of different projects, both at the university and also with some other creation ministries. So he's a firm believer in the Bible, a firm believer in God's word, doesn't hide it at all. So that's great. He's going to be my supervisor, and we're going to be doing a PhD on, well, this is interesting because technically my PhD is on biomedical imaging and spectrometry. In other words, what we're doing is we're using lots of very technical machines to take images of dinosaur bones. Now, the University of Liverpool doesn't offer a PhD in dinosaur bones, so I had to go for a biomedical degree, which I never thought I would be saying, but ultimately that's what we're studying. We're actually studying dinosaurs. What about dinosaurs in particular? Well, we're really looking at soft tissue in dinosaur bones. Now, this has been something that's been known about for a long while, and having sort of grown up as a Christian and been involved with John for a number of years, this is all sort of like second nature to me. But it is still it's just about accepted in the scientific world, but there's a lot of people who still struggle to accept it, and a lot of people who certainly aren't that aware of it. This is really groundbreaking research when you're dealing with the publishing of stuff. Now, it was first discovered in 1993 by Mary Schweitzer, very famous discovery, red blood cells in a T-Rex bone, right? They've done T-Rex stuff, they've done Triceratops stuff, they've done all sorts of interesting stuff, but it's taken a long time, nearly 30 years, to really get it accepted by the scientific community. It now is, but there's so little research actually done on it that has been published. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to publish several papers on this work. I'm obviously going to do a thesis on it, a PhD thesis, and that is really exciting. We've got some great laboratories, and we've also got access to lots and lots of dinosaur bones in yours truly's museum collection, right? We've heard a lot about our museum collection. Do pray for that. There's still plenty of work that needs to be done, and there's been a few hiccups along the way, so do pray for the museum collection project here in the UK. But we have plenty of dinosaur fossils, plenty of dinosaur bones, as well as a whole mixture of other fossils and bones and different stuff, which we're all going to be doing lots and lots of interesting experiments on, including some dinosaur bones from a certain Australian who's got also a number in his collection, and this brand new fossil wood. When John told me about this fossil wood that burns, right, I thought I've just got to get hold of some of this so that I can do some experiments on it as well. And the way that we're leaning towards, both me and Steve, is to try and do something with DNA. See if we can find some remnants, or see if we can are able to sequence some DNA from these dinosaur bones, which of course has huge implications about, well, how old are they actually? How old are they supposed to be? How old could they be if we're finding this kind of stuff? Really, really interesting project, really, really interesting work. So please do keep me in prayer. If you want to support me or support the work that we're doing with the museum project, you can find out more about that at creationresearch.net or our UK site, creationresearchuk.com or creationresearchcentre.com. Lots of ways to help and support us, especially with prayer. So do follow that and find out more about that. Really exciting times, and I'm looking forward to getting my teeth into this, but it does mean I have got a lot of work to do going forward. this was a couple of visitors we had up to our museum area the other day, and you can see one of our giant T-Rex head reconstructions. Great stuff, great fun for the students, right? Great fun for kids to come and see. And really, we're trying to make a connection between the real research, the dinosaur bones, and this sort of, almost you could call it, public perception of what dinosaurs are. Right, we're trying to actually make a connection between the two and then tie it all back into the Bible. Here's another. You can see one of our great dinosaurs behind us and one of our newer fossils that we've acquired. A great big mosasaur jaw, straight from Morocco. Yeah, one of the plans that we've actually got is to try and go to a place like Morocco and excavate a dinosaur for the purposes of looking for soft tissue. Now, that's something that's never really been done before. You see, most soft tissue discoveries have either been accidental or a sort of a side note, as in, oh, we've smashed a bone open, we might as well analyze it. Oh, look what we found inside. We've just happened to find some soft tissue. Or send it away for lots and lots of tests. Oh, and by the way, we also found some soft tissue. Very little information about how this creature was found, how the fossil was found, where it was buried, how it was buried, what kind of sediment was it buried in, what was it buried with. All of this is what we call sedimentological data, or data if you're American. It's very, very interesting way of actually understanding your fossil and putting your fossil in context, but it's never been collected for the purposes of extracting soft tissue. So we want to go to somewhere like Morocco or in the States or Alaska, lots of different options, and actually excavate a fossil for the purposes of extracting soft tissue. So lots and lots of exciting research, lots of exciting different things to do. That's the end of my slideshow presentation. John, have you got any comments to add on to the end of that about soft tissue or anything like that? Because you're going to be my sort of one of my unofficial supervisors, is that right?
I've been trying to supervise you for years, Hubbard. So we'll see if we make any improvements. But I'll tell you what, for today, we are not only going to look at the wood we've been burning and hopefully get you some specimens too. We already have a PhD student out here who's actually come up to check the woody tissue and planning some interesting experiments on petrification. But there's one thing the folks today are going to be able to see. So all of you Aussie-starved visitors from England over there who haven't been able to get out here, if you were to come today and our lovely sunny day, look at that, I mean, eat your heart out, England, you'll find that we have plants, we have a botanic gardens to actually show the sort of things that we find as fossils. Let me bring up one fossil here, swap the screen around, and look at that. Okay, now some of you may recognize that as a pineapple. It's a rather odd-looking pineapple because it's both green and pink. Now, you'll find when you cut this one open, it's got green flesh. It's not as sweet as the commercial one, but it's got growth at both ends. It's a member of the bromeliad family, and what you find is the bromeliads are known as fossils as well. And the interesting thing about our botanic gardens is we don't just have the petrified wood, the piece that I showed you before, this one here is a piece of pine wood. We actually have a garden full of pine trees. You can see some of our native trees growing behind me and probably hear some of the birds. Well, we have a full garden full of our trees, and we also have the plants like the bromeliads, of which there are 3,000 known varieties, and we have heaps of them from all over the planet Earth, which really only is 3 places where they grow natively, but we actually have them at Jurassic Ark, and you can see all the variation that occurs, including our pink and green ones, most unusual, but they are just variations on the same theme. After their own kind is really true, just as you don't need the millions of years to make the layers. God's word about 6 days of creation, then Noah's flood, also is implicitly and explicitly true as well. So that's my only final comment, Joseph. I mean, I've got to leave, as you know, in 10 minutes. So the folks over there can pray the day will stay as beautiful as it is. And the mozzies that I'm being eaten alive by without that spray on will not be there for our guests today. But no, that's about it. If folks want to ask questions, we've got 10 minutes before I have to take off and leave. And then Diane will actually fill my place. And she's got some fascinating stuff on our new Aussie fossils, as the headline said, found in the outback, found in the dead heart of Australia. You listen, it's exciting. Okay,
Great
Joseph.
stuff. Any questions so far, Sam? Any comments? Anything that's
well, I mean, we've had another donation from Iron Matt. He sent $4. So thank you so much. God bless you. We've had quite a few people in the chat. I haven't had any questions so far, but that's okay. Had something from George Bond. It might be interesting to look at for your research, actually. Said that 2 creation scientists have measured carbon-14 concentrations in dinosaur fossils. They found different amounts in the center of the bone to the outer. And basically he's saying the ratio is similar to raw bones.
Yeah, carbon-14 is one of a very, very large number of different techniques or testing techniques that you can do on these kind of bones. Of course, dinosaur bones should not have any carbon-14 in them in the slightest if they're 65 plus million years old. So convincing a carbon-14 lab to test it is quite difficult and can be quite interesting. But we'll see how we go with that, and we'll certainly be trying to do as many different tests as we can. Because one of the things we'd like to come out of this...
Joseph, while you're on carbon-14, and because my time is limited, I have with me today Clem Grieger. Now, Clem is a radiation engineer, right? And so he's brought with him today his Geiger counter. We have radioactive material. We're going to show people how radiation works in half-lives at Jurassic Ark. And one of the points we'll be making, because carbon-14 is the only one that's really commonly used out there by the lay people. It's the one in the Woman's Weekly magazine, used on TV, etc., and falsely claims the world is millions of years old. Carbon-14 proves it. But the one thing we'll be getting them to reach the conclusion of is that the older your piece of wood is claimed to be, the more inaccurate carbon-14 is. The closer you get to the present, because it's only got a short half-life, 5,720, if I remember correctly, something like that, the more accurate it becomes. So by the time you get to the Dead Sea Scrolls, 200 years before Jesus was on the planet, we now know they date before Christ, proved by carbon-14, right? So therefore, the old claim that all the prophecies written in the Bible were written after they happened, and no, you can now prove that is absolutely false, and you can use carbon-14 to do it. So the closer you get to the present, the more accurate it becomes. By the time you get back to the flood, it's starting to fall apart and become useless, no matter who believes. It proves the Aborigines have been here for 70,000 years when they didn't even leave Noah's Ark till 4,500 years ago.
Clem
so that's
is
what we'll be doing today. Yeah.
Clem is a brilliant scientist, basically a rocket scientist, and he's got a fascination and a great knowledge of all things radioactive. And I found this out because the first time, well, the only time I've been to Australia, right? First time on a plane, first time really properly out of the country. Went to Australia, and on the second day, I'm here, head bursting, jet lagged, and John Mackay goes, I know what we're going to do. We're going to get you out into the sunshine, clear your head, and go digging for some stuff, right? Now, this was in the early days of the Strata machine, right back in 2018, so 3.5 years ago, something like that. And so they took me over to an island where there are some special mineral sands, which you can get access to and collect some of these things, right? And so I'm sitting down in the sand, collecting this kind of sand, mineral sands to use in the Strata machine. And we'd forgotten our trowels, right? So I'm down, almost waist deep in sand, scooping this into the bags, covering all my bottom half up with this sand. And Clem goes, oh, this is all radioactive, by the way. And it's and I'm thinking, he could have told me before I'm in here shoveling all this stuff up. But, we had some great results from that stuff on the Strata machines, didn't we?
We did. And that's some of the radiation material we'll be showing them today. And by the way, in case you're worried, the radiation levels there are so low, it's not a problem unless you purify it, which we do use in the nuclear industry out here. That's what the sand is collected for, and for extracting metals for the space industry, etc. So Clem will be with me, and he'll be Professor radiation expert today. So you can use carbon-14 for proving the Bible is true, and Christians need to know how to do that to refute some of the nonsense that's claimed about prophecies in the Bible.
Great stuff. And it's also worth noticing, actually, with carbon-14 as well, that a lot of time in archaeology, when carbon-14 is actually useful, it's completely unnecessary because you've got some good solid dating methods there, like coins or pottery or artifacts.
Yeah.
But it is things like the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are really useful, and carbon-14 can be it's a real genuine science. Although one thing that's been pointed out in me getting started with this doctorate, right, is that it has not been calibrated ever since it was first invented. It's never been questioned, it's never been thought through, it's never been tested. So something we'd like to see come out of some of my research is some mathematics looking at carbon-14 and looking at some of the recalibration of its sort of the modeling that is used when it is done. All right, last chance for any questions before John has to disappear. So any questions come through, any comments before John has to disappear, and we hand over to Diane.
It's looking like we don't have any questions so far. Her Jungle Jargon said the K paternal Y chromosome haplogroup is the descendants of Tubal, and the C paternal Y chromosome haplogroup descendants are the descendants of Nimrod, the son of Cush. So that was words. Yeah.
That sounds like a question for Diane. So maybe
most likely.
If it is a question or a comment, maybe try and put it in question or sort of form that would make it a bit easier. But I think that, John, do you want to give us some last words before you have to disappear? Because I'm conscious of the time.
Yes, one thing just occurred to me because of your comment about what you'd like to do in calibration with carbon-14, etc. I spent several days with Dr. Tom Hayward from the Los Alamos nuclear project, right? And asked him to do one thing. And that was when you look at the carbon-14 forming from radiation in the atmosphere, it's actually forming faster than it's falling to pieces. Mm-hmm. And yet the actual mathematics of it depends on both of those things being equal. Unless you have equal amounts of A and B, then you can't do the maths. You know how X plus Y equals Z plus M. You need that equation to actually make sense of the carbon-14 dating schedules. So I said, well, try and figure out, because you've earned your living blowing things up, shooting things to pieces. I said, can you calculate how long it would take the carbon-14 starting from zero? And you need to listen to that, folks. Nobody can assume there was carbon-14 in the beginning. It's a breakdown product, a damaged product, a byproduct of radiation, cosmic radiation hitting nitrogen in the atmosphere. And it's a dangerous stuff to breathe in. So it wouldn't have been there when God made Adam. So you can't assume it was there in the beginning. In fact, an evolutionist can't assume anything was there in the beginning. And then he has to explain even where hydrogen came from. And he fails miserably at that. And hydrogen would sooner or later have to evolve into carbon. So all of those things they ignore. But I said to Tom, can you calculate, please, using your knowledge, how long it would take the carbon-14 to start from zero to reach the point where it is at the present time? There's about a 20 or 30% difference between the rate it's forming and the rate it's falling apart. And he rather shockedly said to me when he'd done the calculations, he said, minimum 13,000 years, maximum 16,000 years. The air has not been here a long time. And that's assuming it's all been forming at the same rate as today. And so, folks, when you look at carbon-14, ignore the popular media version of it, ignore the high school textbooks. The more you understand it, the more you can say, see, it proves the Bible is true. The world hasn't been here for millions of years. Not even the air is too old for you to breathe, right? It's wonderful stuff. It's made by God and not all that long ago. Now I'm off to take 40 people on a wonderful day of fossil digging. We're looking at beautiful coloured pineapples and having a great time trying to burn up our fossil logs. Okay, God bless.
Great stuff. Catch you later, John. We'll see you later. Good stuff. See you in a bit. There we go. All right, exciting stuff. So keep all this work in prayer. Keep John's work today in prayer as he takes students around. And Clem is a great guy and a really, really intelligent guy as well. And you know that he's a rocket scientist, and I found out exactly how much of a rocket scientist he is when I spent sort of 6 hours in a car with him talking only about thorium energy, right? So it's he's a real valuable asset to creation research. So keep him in prayer, keep John in prayer for today, keep me in prayer as I continue pursuing this doctorate. We had our first sort of proper day up at Liverpool University. We're setting up labs. It's sort of a bit closer to home, so I can do work there and only travel into Liverpool when I sort of need to. But there's a lot to do, a lot to go on, a lot to sort of work through. So keep everything in prayer. Continue to support us in any way that you can. All right, Diane, let's dive into some of your latest work and research and discoveries, and have a bit of a chat about what you've been finding over there before we throw it open to some more questions, if there are any.
Yes. Well, one of the things that we do at Creation Research is to just trawl the normal scientific news, see what's been reported, and invariably the science news sites and news services report things in terms of an evolutionary framework about how this discovery either proves evolution or shows the evolution of something. And so it's always interesting to look at what was actually discovered. We try and go back to the original sources if we can, and get people to look at how it can be looked at from a biblical point of view, from the worldview of the real history of the world, which we know it started out good, it's gone bad, it's going downhill, but it does have a great future. So there are a couple of interesting stories that came out in the last few weeks. How's this for a headline, Joseph? Mind-blowing new fossil site found in the dead heart of Australia.
Dead heart of Australia. I've been to the dead heart of Australia. It is pretty dead.
Yes. So where do you think they found these fossils?
Oh, I don't know, somewhere around Alice Springs or in the middle of the outback, somewhere, right far from any kind of civilization. I mean, I remember when I was traveling with John, we'd drive for the whole day and we'd see one house kind of thing. It'd be miles and miles and no roads and huge, great big, corrugations in the roads, which you had to drive very fast to try and touch the tops of them. And so, yeah, somewhere right in the middle, I reckon.
Yes, all right. I have got a map of Australia. Can we look at it? I've got it on a slide.
You should be able to share your screen and bring it up.
Okay, if I share my screen. Now, do I need to have it on the...
It should just work by sharing it and bringing your screen up.
Let me see. All right, share screen, yes. All right. Now, can you see that?
Yes. Yeah, I can see it. There we go. Yeah, lovely. So right in the middle there is somewhere around in the middle is Alice Springs and the outback and the desert and everything. It's middle of nowhere. And just by the way, to put this into perspective, just very quickly, for those who don't know sort of how big Australia is, if to put it in European context, right, if you were to go right over on the west side and drive all the way over to the east side, that'd be like starting here in the UK and driving all the way over to Turkey. Right, it's a pretty big country, and for you in the US, it is the equivalent of driving from one side of the states to the other. Right, so from sort of California to Washington DC kind of thing, it is a big country.
Yes, if I just fill the screen, will that make that?
That should go up to full screen. Yeah,
that's good. Yes, all right. So here we've got the map of Australia. Now you can see there are lots of different colours there because there are lots of different climate and ecological zones in Australia, and so it's not all deserts. There are actually some quite lush places, and if you look down the eastern seaboard there, you can see that's green. This is a satellite photo. There are lots of green areas in Australia. It's not all dead. And over on the eastern side there, you can see there are some quite dense green places where the landscape is quite heavily wooded, and then there are lighter green places which are mainly grasslands and farmlands and things like that. So it's not all dead. Now, Where do you think these fossils were found? The description in the report says it's the central tablelands of New South Wales. So I'll give you a clue. New South Wales is a state over on the eastern side, the central tablelands. Well, when I read that, I thought, oh, that's interesting, because I lived in an area called the central tablelands for quite a while. And it was a very, very long way from the dead heart of Australia. It's actually about there.
It's right on the coast, pretty much, isn't it? Compared to the rest.
So yes, it's definitely in the green area, and it's not dead, because these fossils were actually found in a farmer's field. He was ploughing his field. So, and I know this from when I lived there. It was just normal farming country. It was grazing land and arable crops. So the dead heart of Australia, no, it's not like that at all. There are live places in Australia, but the most interesting thing, of course, are these fossils. So if we can go back to, we'll come back to another map later on, but can I, if I finish this, how do I go back? Just stop share?
Stop sharing, right. And that should be fine. It should come back to us. There we go.
There we are, yes. All right. Now, in fact, this was a marvellous fossil find, and the description in the headline, mind-blowing new fossil site, and there were numerous similar descriptions on the other science news sites that I looked at. These were brilliant fossils because they were so incredibly well preserved. And there was a huge variety of them. And they found rainforest plants. They found over 50 different types of plants. They found insects, spiders, invertebrates, a bird feather, some fish. They were so well preserved, they could actually see what the fish had eaten. They could look at them under a microscope and they could actually see pollen and cellular structures. They could see the cellular surface structures in the leaves with the, the little stomates, that let gases in and out of leaves. They could see that kind of detail. So these were incredibly well-preserved fossils, and there was a huge variety of plants and fish. That's land plants, and rainforest plants. Now, even though that area of Australia is not dead, it's certainly not a rainforest. So these fossils are very interesting for those three different reasons: incredible variety of land and water creatures, incredible preservation right down to the microscopic size, and this was a different sort of climate. This was a rainforest. It's not a rainforest anymore, so something has definitely changed. There has definitely been some climate change. Australia was once a much wetter place, and not only in that eastern seaboard region, but right across. And there are some areas which are now dead. They really are deserts. But there are fossil finds in them that indicate they once were heavily wooded, had lots of trees and lots of animals living amongst those trees. We've written about some of those in the fact file. If you want to check one of our websites, it's just called the fact file, where we archive these science news type reports. So it was a fascinating fossil find, and look how it fits into, if we look at that from a biblical point of view. Australia was once a much more lush area. The whole world was. It started out good, it's gone bad. So Australia has definitely gone down. There has been climate change, but these fossils weren't preserved by slow, gradual layers forming up. And we've just looked with John about how layers form quickly. Now, you've seen the strata machine in action, and so have I. And those layers, you can just sit there and watch them form in minutes. You've seen it happen, Joseph.
Yeah,
and
it's remarkable.
Yeah, yes. And I've seen it happen, form layers like that as well. So there's nothing slow and gradual about laying down rock layers, and there couldn't be anything slow and gradual about forming these fossils if you've got all this microscopic detail right down to real microscopic cellular size things. And also, if you can look at a fish fossil and see what the fish has actually been eating, it wasn't slowly and gradually buried. So a fascinating fossil site, exactly what you would find if you looked at it from a biblical point of view, from the real history of the real world, of the world starting out good. It was being judged at Noah's flood, where there was masses and masses of sediment. Just think of all of the water flows that would have happened there. Now, even after Noah's flood, there was certainly various local floods and catastrophes as the world settled down, but no fossil site that is that well preserved could possibly be formed slowly and gradually. So that whole theory that John was talking about before, of rock layers forming slowly and gradually, fossils forming slowly and gradually, that's not what's out in the real world. What we see out in the real world is rapid burial, rapid formation, and exquisite preservation, because everything has happened so fast. And we see mixtures of land plants, land things, and aquatic things. So this is not a buried ecosystem. This is a whole mass of things that have been swept up and then dumped very quickly and buried deeply. Yes. So anything else that you'd like to add to that, Joseph?
No, I think it's worth getting an idea or a picture of how big Australia is, just because you can then understand how big these deposits are. I mean, you talk about the Jurassic logjam, fossil logjam that John's going off to go and do, some excavation and stuff with this group today, and you see the kind of the burning logs, right? And you go there and you think, oh yeah, for sure, this is a fossil logjam, right? This has been washed in by water. And you've got to try and scale it up, because this covers like a third of Australia, this deposit. It's enormous. And you think, well, a third of Australia, what's that? I mean, a third of the UK, a third of England, that's quite big. It'll take you a couple of hours to a few hours perhaps to drive across it. I mean, a third of Australia is crossing like half of Europe by this point, right? It is absolutely enormous. It is a phenomenal kind of size. And when you're talking about something on that scale, you've got to bear in mind that you've got to get that soil from somewhere. You've got to get that sediment from somewhere. It's sort of a sandy, iron-rich stone. So you've got to get all of that sandy stuff from somewhere. That requires erosion. That requires high volumes of water. You then got to have enough water to be able to wash over the land and rip up the trees and wash them down. And that water has got to be big enough to carry that volume of trees. So it's got to cover a large volume of land in the first place to rip up the trees. It's then got to cover another volume of land to actually bury this deposit, which was at least the third size of Australia, could quite possibly be a lot larger, because a lot of stuff has been eroded away post that being deposited. And so all of a sudden you're faced with the conclusion that in order to get that volume of water carrying that volume of sediment, you're looking at enough water to cover the entire world. So you're instantly looking at a worldwide flood. I mean, when you scale it up to that kind of size, especially a third of Australia, it just is absolutely phenomenal. So it is worth getting a picture of that. It is worth gaining that kind of a picture of how big these deposits really are, because one thing that I think a lot of scientists are guilty of is very not narrow-minded in the normal sense of narrow-minded, but narrow-sighted perhaps. They've got flaps on because they go to one location and look at it and say, oh yeah, this is definitely a flood, but they never think to connect that up with the rest of the deposits. I mean, you see it here in the UK, right? You go to a place called Ostcliffe, which is down near Bristol, and it says clearly on all the tourist information signs, this was an area that was overwhelmed by a flood, no doubt about it. And then you go down to Budleigh Salterton down on the south coast of the UK, and it says this was an area that was overwhelmed by a flood. And they've never stopped to think to actually join the two together, because they're exactly the same deposit. So this flood went from at least Bristol down to the south coast. And then you find it's the same kind of stuff that you find running all the way up the middle of England, where I live in Shropshire, right? And so it went as far north as Shropshire. And then when you find out it went as far north as Scotland, then you find it's found over in Europe, then you find it's found in the States, then it's over in Australia. This is a worldwide flood, right? You've got to actually match this all up to get the big picture. And the big picture is really key when you're looking at all of this. So, great fossil finds right from the dead centre of Australia, or rather over in the corner tucked down next to the sea. But there we go. Never mind. Great stuff.
Yes. Yes, well, another piece of news about Australia. We're poking a bit of fun at some of the science journalists here who don't know their Australian geography. But this is what happens with headlines sometimes. This is a story about a mysterious, indestructible black box which will tell the future what happened to us. That's the headline. And the first paragraph of this story in one of the science news sites is at a distant end of the earth, hidden somewhere in the remote Australian island of Tasmania. Now, I don't know whether you got to go to Tasmania, Joseph. Did you?
I did, yes.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, yes, that's right. Well, was it right at the end of the earth?
Yeah. I mean,
all right.
They had shops, and
yeah, some of our colleagues live and work in Tasmania. I've been there quite a few times. Yes, let's go back to the
they had roads. I mean,
yeah, let's go back to the map of Australia and have a look at where Tasmania is, because I don't blame people for not knowing their geography, but because there's a lot of geography about England and Europe that I don't know. But anyway, if we just go to the next slide here, right, Tasmania is not a tiny dot on the map somewhere down near Antarctica. It sort of actually hangs off the bottom of the mainland of Australia, and Bass Strait, which is the area of sea that separates it from the southern part of the mainland, there is 150 miles wide. So it's not exactly the distant end of the earth, but anyway, we'll go back to our chat, our headlines here.
Yeah, I sort of flew across from Melbourne to Australia, and bear in mind, Melbourne it's on the coast, but it's not, right there. It's not on the seaside, and it took about half an hour to 40 minutes.
Half an hour, yes, I've been on that flight several times.
At the end of the world in the slightest, and there are lots and lots of islands in between. And I think, can you take a ferry if you choose? I know it's obviously longer.
Oh, yes, you can. It's a lovely trip. It's worth doing. So when international travel is allowed again, do come to Australia, do go to Tasmania, and going by ferry is a lovely way to go. And do go and visit our colleague who runs the seahorse farm at Beauty Point, lovely place near Launceston.
Craig Hawkins, we've had Craig on the show before, and he talked to us about some of this. Right. We're gonna have him on again as we move forward in this sort of new set of programs when we can get the software working. But what we're gonna try and orchestrate, I say that because technology, but it's sort of a bit of a tour, not only around his museum but also around the seahorse world, because he breeds these seahorses as well as many other marine life. His wife is a marine biologist, so there could be some really, really fascinating look at some of this sea life. So yeah, we definitely need to have him on again.
I'm going to be honest, that just sounds like sort of like a weird branch of the Sea Life Centre, Seahorse World.
Yeah, it is quite similar to the sea life centres, right? We're used to them here in the UK. I think they are elsewhere around the world, but yeah, it's kind of like that, but it is sort of a more, I suppose you could call it a more commercially kind of built place. So it does have your cafes and your shops and stuff like that, but you actually get to go around and see the seahorse breeding. So they actually breed the seahorses, which are shipped all around the world for all sorts of various different uses, including to the Sea Life Centres. They've sent stuff over here to the UK, to Hunstanton Sea Life Centre and places like that. So they're sent all over the world. He breeds them commercially, as well as has like a sort of a sea life display that you can go around and see all these different creatures and stuff, and get to see the big tanks and everything with them all in, and feeding them and everything. So it's a real great place to go and see. It's absolutely wonderful. I'll have to pull up some photos at some point, but yeah.
Yes, that's definitely worth it. Yes. Anyway, this story about Tasmania is about a group of people who want to build a black box. Now, they're using the term black box in the way that we talk about an aeroplane black box, meaning a device that actually monitors a whole lot of data from the workings of the aeroplane, as well as recording the cockpit conversation, so that if something goes wrong, this can be retrieved and they can analyze this data and find out what happens. So this group of people want to build a black box in that sense of the word and monitor all sorts of climate and environmental things like sea temperatures, and also monitor what's going on, news headlines about what's going on, about how humanity is coping with climate change. And as yet, they haven't done this because they're still waiting for some bureaucratic permission. But anyway, they're determined to do this because they're quite convinced that because of all of the things that we've done to the Earth is going to end, and it's all our fault. And on their website, you can look this up. It's called Earth's Black Box. They have this quote here: "How the story ends is completely up to us." Mm-hmm. Now get that, right? We're causing the problem, and the implication, of course, is that we can solve the problem. However, we know from the biblical history of the world that, yes, the Earth is in a mess, and we have done some pretty bad things to the environment. But how the world ends is not up to us, because the creator of the world is also the one who is going to bring it to an end, and he will sustain it until he is ready to bring it to an end, and he will know when it is unsustainable. So don't put your faith in a black box. Put your faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, who is the creator and the judge, who judged the world in the beginning when sin entered the world and things started to go downhill. He hasn't forgotten us. Right, he sent Jesus to be our savior, so that when the world does end, right, it's not going to be a catastrophe for all those who have put their faith in the creator. So how the story ends is not completely up to us. It's up to the one who owns the whole world, because he is the creator of the world.
Amen.
Yes, don't put your faith in the black box, put your faith in the black book.
That's good.
Amen.
Yes.
Yeah. Great stuff. Yeah. Great stuff.
Indeed. Yes. Anyway, that's a bit of a diversion, but it's just these two stories came out fairly close to one another, with some interesting comments about Australian geography that John and I thought we had better correct for the rest of the world. But let's go back to fossils. I gather in the UK, there's been a giant ichthyosaur found.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I saw that on my newsfeed. I was like, "Oh, yes, this is what I call news."
Yeah. So some of you may have watched the Digging for Britain episode where that featured. The guy who led the excavation, I actually know, Dean Lomax. I've met him a number of times, and I'm also getting in touch with him on a professional basis in order to do some stuff, hopefully with the University of Liverpool. So watch this space, but we don't know anything specific yet. But yeah, it's a lovely, lovely example. It's the largest. I think it was like 11 meters, something like that. It's
yes, I've seen the photo. It was really enormous.
Absolutely phenomenal. What's interesting is it's fairly obviously been scavenged once it has died, but it's been buried in a sort of partially scavenged state, so it's obviously hasn't been scavenged for that long. If you have a look at examples today of creatures that have been scavenged, whether they've bloated and floated and slowly sunk or whatever, by the time they reach the bottom of the seabed, they are pretty much disarticulated. They're all over in many pieces. Right? It was I think it was in The Blue Planet, a famous BBC production with David Attenborough narrating, and you see a blue whale or some kind of whale that's reached the bottom of the sea, right? And they show you it, and it's all in pieces and it's being scavenged, and then they show you a few months later and there's almost nothing left of it, right? Including all the bones have gone. So to find a creature this well preserved is remarkable, and the fact that it started to be scavenged and they found ichthyosaur teeth actually in the back of its vertebrae, so where it's had a good munch and it's lost a tooth, it's still preserved really, really beautifully. So it's part of the, if I remember correctly, I think it's part of the Kimmeridge clays, which is a famous Jurassic deposit in the UK. You can find it all up and down. It's more unusual to be found in a place like Rutland. It would have seemed to have been buried because where it was found is kind of like in a big water reservoir area with mud flats, and most of that mud flats is just silt. And so what seems to have happened is that as you've had the rise and the fall of the water as the winter and the summer kind of fluctuates, you've ended up having a bit of erosion, which has taken the top layer of the silt off. Maybe it's changed course, or it's been a bit more erosive one year, or so on and so forth, and you've ended up having this beautiful ichthyosaur exposed, where they've been able to then go down and excavate it. And they excavated it over 2 stages, once in the winter when it was horrible and wet and gooey and very difficult, and they decided to bury it up again a bit and come back in the summer when they could excavate it properly and do some proper research on it. So watch this space. We may be getting involved with some proper research on that ichthyosaur, so pay attention. But it's a beautiful example. Great example.
Yeah, that would be good. Yes, when I saw the photo, and even though it may have been partly scavenged, it's basically still intact in terms of it hasn't fallen to pieces.
No, pretty much.
I have read that ichthyosaur bones are often found as sort of isolated pieces of vertebrae, which are like sort of little bony discs, but these were all still in line, and the limbs and the head were still in the right place.
Yeah, I can verify that because I have an ichthyosaur vertebrae with me. Well, not to hand, but but it's been it's one of those ichthyosaur vertebrae that's actually been sort of just been washed along. It's been sort of just exposed, and then it's just been washed and washed and washed. It's got some barnacles on the back of it, but you're quite right. They usually vertebrae are found aside from the main skeleton, so it's Is it somewhat of a rarity, Joe, to find a skeleton of a ichthyosaur?
It's somewhat of a rarity because most of the places that you find your ichthyosaurs in the UK are on the beach, where the tides has done their work of washing them out of the cliff face, right? And when that happens, even if you have a complete skeleton, it's going to be washed out bit by bit, right? So if you find it, it's usually a partial skeleton. All the bits have been lying all around the beach, right? All over the place. So it's more of a rarity just because our topography, if you want to call it that, lends itself to more of a coastal area where the sea's doing the work. So it's a rarity to have an opportunity to find an ichthyosaur where that hasn't happened, almost in pristine condition as it was buried, right? And yes, it has been scavenged, but that's mostly the flip has been twisted around a long way and there's a tooth sticking out of its backbone and so on and so forth. It's still in pretty much intact condition, buried there. So if you had the ability to sort of excavate your way through the cliffs, most of your ichthyosaurs you'd find would be partial skeletons or complete skeletons, or it's just the way that it's found. They tend to be washed out and then rolled around in the sea for a while. So it did have a very, very unique opportunity to be able to actually excavate that and see that, which was quite remarkable, really. So great stuff.
Yes. Oh well, we shall look forward to further research on that. Hopefully from your personal
we'll keep you updated for sure.
What's reported in the science news.
We'll keep you updated. We'll keep you updated. Great stuff. All right. Well, we've been doing this for, it's going to be about an hour now, isn't it? Because we started half an hour later than normal. We don't need to go sort of on for the whole way. So what I think is let's have a look and see if there's any questions come through. Yeah, sure. If there has, we'll deal with some of those. and then we'll sort of wrap up and end, and hopefully we're back to normal next time in a new setup, so that will be interesting, and hopefully that'll work better, and hopefully our program and software works as well. I'm going to be writing an email to try and work out what happened there, and hopefully stop it from happening again in the future. But at least we were able to come to you through Zoom anyway. So any questions, Sam?
Yes, we do. We've had a few questions, actually.
Good.
Any thoughts on the discovery of a perfectly preserved fossilized dinosaur embryo, the embryo named Baby Yinglang?
Mm-hmm.
Initial thoughts from me would be that this is a bog standard case of something being buried extremely rapidly.
Yeah, pretty much. Dinosaur eggs were not like chicken eggs in the sense they were hard. They were like other reptile eggs, like snake eggs. They were sort of soft, leathery. So yeah, for sure, to preserve it, you have to bury it quickly. You find complete nests, which are absolutely wonderful, and it's a brilliant example of it being preserved very quickly. So that's first of all. And they found this, did some various X-rays to it, and the various scans, dug down inside of the egg and found this gorgeously preserved embryo. Absolutely beautiful. Of course, what's interesting is in almost every single diagram or artist's reconstruction of this embryo as it was when it was growing and alive, showed the baby covered in sort of downy feathers. How many feathers did we find in this embryo? A grand total of nil. So it does actually show you the kind of
artistic license.
Yeah, artistic license, but it's, I mean, obviously artistic license was used, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with artistic license, but it shows you the philosophy that's sort of underpinning this artistic license. Or the philosophy that affects the interpretation of the evidence, if you want to put it that way, right? To give you an idea, a quote from actually Dr. Dean Lomax, the guy who led this excavation, right? I first met him when he was giving a lecture, great lecture, very knowledgeable guy, he comes from a great background of doing great research. And I had noticed during this lecture that all of his diagrams and pictures and artists' impressions of dinosaurs, all of them, of the theropod dinosaurs at least, were covered in feathers, whether they be good feathers or downy feathers or whatever. And I said to him, I'm just intrigued because, as far as I'm aware, most of these fossils that you're displaying with feathers haven't had feathers found with them. Am I missing something? Have you found something that I didn't know about? And he said, yeah, we know that dinosaurs evolved into birds, so we assume that all of the theropod dinosaurs had feathers. So it is an assumption. The fossil evidence doesn't back it up yet, and it hasn't really ever backed it up. And you can kind of see this in the case of the embryo, because if you Google it, right, new embryo found, or Google dinosaur embryo and click on the news tab, right, it'll show you wonderful picture after picture after picture of this dinosaur embryo that they found, right, the actual picture, and you can compare it to the artistic impression, if you want, covered in downy feathers, and they're worlds apart. So it really is the philosophy, the underpinning philosophy, that affects the interpretation of the data. So that's something else you really need to be careful and look out for. And it's blatantly obvious, because you can see it there and you can compare the two photos. It's not like they're hiding it or something, but you can kind of see the issue that's there as well. So go and check that out. But yeah, it's a beautiful example. Great example of rapid fossilization, and a great example of a featherless dinosaur. So,
fantastic. Right. Okay.
Any thoughts on it, Diane? I don't know if you've picked that up in the news over your way.
Yeah, yes, we did see that. It is exquisitely preserved. So Sam is right. It had to be very rapidly preserved in order to preserve all of this exquisite detail, very, very fine detail. The reason they were so excited about it, it's fairly late in the development, so you get a really good look at the structure of a baby dinosaur that hasn't got long in the egg to go before it hatches out. So it's a beautiful example of an unhatched baby dinosaur, very exquisitely preserved. And therefore, there is no excuse for putting feathers on it because it is so well preserved. You can see all of the internal details. So very nice example, worth having a look at. Have a look at the actual find, the fossil find, not the illustrations. Yes.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Any other questions?
We've got a joke.
Okay.
From
George.
Yes, guess
yes, yeah, of course.
Joke. If Australia is the ass end of the world, what does that say about Tasmania?
No comment. No comment.
No comment, yes.
Seabass
Move on.
has said, what other creation ministries do you collaborate with for your work?
Okay, well, there's a number of different people, as in individuals, that we collaborate with, people who John or I have met over the years, people who come from a scientific background, like Diane, who's obviously come a bit more on board than some of the others might do. But these are people that we can go to, obviously, for advice, both scientific and sort of their thoughts on things, so they help a lot. In terms of specific creation ministries, sort of open to working to a lot of different people. I've personally worked with Answers in Genesis. In fact, Answers in Genesis and creation research go way back because Ken Ham, who's sort of founded Answers in Genesis, started working for John Mackay way back in the 1970s, right? So a long time ago, 70s, 80s. So they go way back. And so here in the UK, at least, I often feature on Answers in Genesis's conferences and broadcasts and stuff that they do, and we're hoping to work together again in the future with field trips and things like that. So keep an eye out for that if you're in the UK and in the area. We've worked with a number of other people, including so one of the things that I will be working with is my kind of predecessor for our doctorate work, right? The first one to really be done with Steve Taylor and the work that we're doing was now Dr. Brian Thomas, who works with the Institute of Creation Research, and again ICR and creation research in the form of their founders John and so on and so forth go back quite a way. So I'll be working with them, and I'll be working with Brian Thomas and a number of other organisations in the States that we'll also do stuff with. Here in the UK, another key organisation is the Creation Science Movement, who have a little another little museum down in Portsmouth, and we've provided fossils for them. We've done talks and stuff for them. In fact, Diane, I believe you've been down there a number of times, haven't you?
Yes, I have several times, and I've spoken at conferences for them. Yes, hope to catch up with them again if I'm allowed back into the UK.
Back in, yeah. So yeah, we work with a number. We're in the middle of updating a lot of our websites and stuff, and we've got big plans for the future. So in a couple of months, keep an eye out on our sort of websites, and you'll see updates as to what we're doing there.
Got two more very quick questions, and then we've got sort of like a slightly more lengthy one from George. The first quick question is a follow on from the dinosaur egg question. Have they found scales with any of these dinosaurs that they show with feathers?
They have found a lot of dinosaur scales and dinosaur skin impressions, at least, and there's no signs of feathers on them. I would have to look through what they think those dinosaur scales / skin impressions belong to, but I'm pretty sure we found theropod skin impressions, and so that's a big clue that they didn't have feathers, right? They had skin and scales. So yeah, I'd have to double check and look that up. But yeah, we've definitely found dinosaur scales. And I mean, the biggest thing is, just because we don't find scale impressions doesn't mean that that automatically meant they had feathers, right? Just because you don't find, the fact that you haven't found any feathers is a big clue to the point that they didn't have feathers. Right? The only reason why we assume they did have feathers is because of the belief that dinosaurs evolved into birds. So that shows you that really it's not down to evidence, it's down to assumption, it's down to interpretation, and it's down to the philosophy which affects your interpretation. So if you have a preconceived belief that dinosaurs evolved into birds, then you're going to be accepting the fact that dinosaurs had feathers, whether you find feathers or not. So it really shows you that evidence has absolutely nothing to do with it.
Yes, yes. We have a couple of stories on our fact file about dinosaur skin that you might like to look up. I do remember writing about one of them where the scientists were quite annoyed that they hadn't found feathers with a particular dinosaur, because according to the evolutionary timetable and according to its sort of place in the dinosaur phylogenetics, the evolutionary tree, it should show sign of feathers, and they're very disappointed that it didn't. I think the headline that we gave for that is "What No Feathers," but anyway, look that up on our fact file. So yes, dinosaur skin has been found, and it's clearly scaly. Various fibrous structures have been found associated with dinosaurs, but things that are clearly feathers have not been found. So it's not because of the evidence, it's because of the belief in evolution.
Great stuff.
Right.
Another question?
Quick. Do you think God allows these things to be found in order to expose the narrow-mindedness of his critics? I think God's got a sense of humour. So
absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, I think possibly. I mean, one thing that is for sure is before me and John go digging for fossils, we always spend time, in prayer, praying that God will lead us to the fossils. We do believe that he's the sovereign God after all, and this is his ministry, including all the fossils that belong to it, right? So we're very grateful when he does provide things. And he really has provided some rather amazing stuff. So, in the end of the day, all of it is evidence. It really is all evidence. And so it really comes down to the way that you interpret the evidence. And some evidence is, you could argue, more poignant than other types of evidence. But it doesn't really matter how poignant it is, because if you have the wrong starting point, your interpretation of it is going to be off anyway. So it really does come down to a philosophical issue rather than a scientific one. And it happens very, very quickly anyway. And we have a whole program on, presuppositions and pre-understandings and philosophy, if you like, the philosophy of science, as well as a really good one that John has done on the limitations of science. In a world today where science is regarded as God, it really does pay to, understand the limitations that science actually presents. So yeah, have a look up of some of those programs on our websites.
Yes, it's important to remember God is the God of the real world. So what is out there is the evidence of his handiwork. So don't be afraid to go out and have a look at it, and don't be afraid to read the scientific reports. Just think about things as you see them out in the real world. Go and dig up fossils, look at the living world. And yes, the evidence of God's handiwork is there, and it makes sense when you look at it from the biblical worldview. From this is the real history of the real world. What is out there will make sense. So I would encourage young Christians to go into science and go and have a look at the evidence of God's handiwork in the world, both in creation and in judgment. Yes, so
yeah, great stuff. All right, Sam, any other questions?
I have a thought it's not really a thought from me, but it's sort of more of a jokey thought. I'm a bit worried about having you in a lab, Joe, because you're saying that you're going to try and find dinosaur DNA. I'm a bit concerned you're going to turn into like the next generation of John Hammond from Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
And next thing I'll know, I'll see you and you'll have a cane with amber on the top, and you'll be wearing a white suit. Yeah. You've already got the beard.
For somebody who studied dinosaurs, I never did understood the white suit, John Hammond. You don't wear a white suit if you're going to go going anywhere near.
Go out and dig in the dirt.
Yeah. I'm sticking with Indiana Joe. I think I'll stick with that. Although a cane with amber would be quite cool. But of course, the whole thing, the premise of that book and the film, right, is that they had a mosquito which drank the blood of a dinosaur, and then the blood of the mosquito was stuck inside the belly of the blood of the dinosaur was stuck inside the belly of the mosquito. The mosquito got caught in amber, and that's what they were able to extract the dinosaur DNA from. Failing to understand, of course, that red blood cells are one of the few cells that don't have a nucleus and don't have DNA in it, because their sole purpose is to cart your oxygen to things and carbon dioxide away from things. So it's the whole premise of the book and the film kind of falls down quite quickly. But this is the first time we've kind of come, it's about as close as we'll come to reconstructing a dinosaur. It won't ever happen, but it will be interesting to see if we can find DNA remains, because of course DNA being of very much biological origin and also very complex biological origin, one of the things you tend to find is the more complex things are, the easier they break down, because the more things you need to have holding them together. So if we can find DNA, it'll be great, a real fascinating insight. So we'll see where we get. All right, any final questions before we begin to shut down for the night?
Yes, we've had one here. Where has it gone? This is coming from Neil. If dinosaurs had feathers, do any birds have scales?
Okay, it depends on your definitions. Once again, because birds do have some what we might call scales, especially if you think about things like chicken feet or ostrich feet or things like that. They do have the appearance of scales. Are they scales in the sense of what we think with reptiles? No, they're not. Because in the sense of reptiles, when you have scales, you have individual keratin plates, right, which are attached at the root. They're essentially like your fingernails in a sense, but fingernail upon fingernail upon fingernail. They are attached to the root. They are actually something that is attached biologically, and then they're covered in a skin which is able to be shed, right? And then if you go beneath them, in some reptiles like your crocodilians, you have scutes which kind of hold them together and anchor everything together, right? A completely different setup to your bird scales, in sort of inverted commas, right? It's a completely different set. In the bird scales, you're more dealing with tough skin, which is kind of lashed down in different areas. So you're really dealing with something completely different when you're comparing scales to feathers. And trying to say the standard argument, which is, oh, well, scales are made of keratin, feathers are made of keratin, therefore one can evolve into the other, is like saying a frying pan is made of steel, a plane is made of steel, therefore given enough time, one can evolve into the other. It just doesn't work, right? They're completely different things for completely different functions, and a huge amount of information is required to actually turn one into the other. You need a creative process, and that requires an intelligent design. So if you're going to get an intelligent designer to turn scales into feathers, you may have well have created them out of nothing like Jesus did. So a few thoughts there. Diane, any thoughts from you?
Yes, you're right. Just because another creature has scales does not mean that one evolved into another. A bird has scales on their legs and feet for the purpose of just protecting the skin there. So they've got a hard, scaly surface. It's not like reptile scales, which often have other functions as well. They have color, they're used for communication as well as protection, and have all sorts of other interesting structure to them. You're right. We have to remember that different living things may have similar components. That is no evidence that one evolved into the other. It just means that those particular structures are useful for that living thing in its place. And there's no evidence that having similar structures, similar substances like keratin indicate any sort of evolutionary connection. They just indicate that these are useful, functional things, and they're actually good evidence for creation.
Absolutely. absolutely. Great stuff. All right, final question, or are we all out?
Final question from George Bond.
All right, brace yourselves.
Since the Australian Aborigines have a global flood story and it is considered the oldest culture in the world, does that suggest the Epic of Gilgamesh was plagiarized from the Aborigines?
I like what you did there, George. Yeah. Give me some background. The argument is that the Epic of Gilgamesh predates the Bible and the biblical account of the flood. Therefore, the argument is that the children of Israel stole the Epic of Gilgamesh while they were in captivity, right? And if you want to go, we've got articles of that on our site, and in particular, I point you to the work of Dr. John Osgood, who's done some fascinating study into this. But basically, no, they didn't copy it. It does predate it. There's all sorts of stuff that you can find, especially in terms of accounts and stuff like that. But I like what you did there, George, because of course their Aborigines have the flood legends, and they're supposed to go up to 70,000 years now. It's
70,000 years.
What's interesting though is the Aborigines actually have a few different flood legends. So they have a main one, but they also have one where it records the sea levels rising. So you've also got an account of climate as well, with sea levels rising, most likely at the end of the Ice Age, which happened after the flood, and you have the melting of the ice and hence the sea level rises. And it also explains how you got animals to Australia as well, because the simple answer is they walked there because all of the water was locked up in ice, and so the sea levels were lower. And so you've got some fascinating oral history there as well. But it's worth having a look at some of the history and the archaeology.
Yes, it is interesting that most cultures all over the world, very distant from one another, do have flood stories. It's very, very common in a lot of culture, and so that should make you think, well, maybe there was an original somewhere back there that's been partly forgotten, partly added to and embellished. What's the original? It all makes sense if you think, right, Genesis is the original. All of these other ones are variations where, as people were dispersed away from after the Tower of Babel, they took that knowledge with them, but over the generations, of course, they would have forgotten things if things weren't recorded or passed on accurately. And also human beings are very creative, so we often embellish things. So some of these long epics have all sorts of strange things happen in them that aren't in the original. But it all makes sense. If you remember, yes, Genesis is the original. All of these other variations of flood stories are the embellished or partly forgotten variations that fits with the history of the world. And but the interesting thing is, so many cultures have these flood legends, so there has to be an original somewhere.
Yeah. Great stuff. All right, any last questions, Sam, or shall we finish up for the evening?
We've got one last question, as well as also we've had someone in the chat called Brainbug, who's said that you and him should have a discussion sometime on the fact that modern birds actually do have scales. He said birds can also have scales with structure and coloration on their legs. Take the boobies for instance.
Oh yeah, definitely with color, yeah. But function, yeah. We should have a get together and a chat or something. But yeah, we'll have a we'll have a thing. But yeah,
Brainbug, if you reach out on if you send us an email at if you go on to creationresearch.net and find our contact information, you certainly get in contact. There is one last question from George. He's asked me to go find it. I found it. Right, okay. Since Luca gave rise to the 3 different domains of life, does that contradict the law of monophily?
Okay. Couple of comments from me, and then I'll hand over to you, Diane. Luca is last universal common ancestor, I think, and they were supposed to have branched out into 3 main sort of branches or domains, which was the Euchara, the bacteria, and the Archaea. And the law of monophyly is basically each one of these are distinct as they sort of branch out and grow out into the various different diversity that we see today, right, in terms of the history of evolution. I wouldn't say it's a contradiction to the theory necessarily, because they still believe that it was one single last universal common ancestor, which kind of branched out into three main groups, and those three main groups then branched out again, bacteria or archaea, which then we would refer to as animals, kingdom Animalia, and so on and so forth. Bacteria, in fact, I think archaea would have also branched out into fungus, if I remember correctly, from what they say. So you've still got this sort of little globule, primordial soup, whatever you want to call it, branching out into a life form and then branching out into so on and so forth, and they go out and out and out and out. So I wouldn't say it's a contradiction. What I would say there's issue with is getting those in the first place, because your main issue is with evolution is not only the abundant evidence for design, it's also the lack of new information, or the difficulty of information that's required to be added. And for everything that we can see, according to all the rules of design, information is a design. So you need a designer. And so there's a number of issues there. But Diane, any comments on your part?
Yes, the whole idea of a last universal common ancestor goes back to the problem of the origin of life for the evolutionists, because they have to explain how non-life turned into life. And because they recognize that to make even just one cell requires a whole lot of complexity, they tend to believe, well, it must have only happened once. It's just the odds of it happening more times than once. So they say, well, it happened once, and then this one cell multiplied into a whole lot of cells, and then some of these took off in different directions and eventually became all the different types of life forms that we find. But so Luca, the last universal common ancestor, is a concept in people's minds. It's not something that's actually been found. And it goes back to the fact that the evolutionists have somehow got to explain the origin of life. And because it's just so complicated and requires so much information, they believe, well, it must have only happened once, and then everything else branched off from there.
Anyway, I think we're coming towards the end, and I've got a busy day tomorrow and everything. It's late here, so I think we should wrap up.
Quick question, not in from the chat, but from me, for Brainbug. What's the best email address for him to get in contact with us? Just the normal one on the website, should
info@creationresearchuk.com. That should come through to our office, and we can branch out from there probably. I can't guarantee to reply straight away. It may take a week or two, because we're very backlogged with a lot of different stuff, and there's a lot of stuff going on. But we will reply eventually at some point, and we'll take it from there. info@creationresearchuk.com. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been an interesting broadcast. I did panic a little bit earlier when everything was crashing, and I thought it was my Wi-Fi, and then Sam said he couldn't get on either. So
it was a scary time. It was terrifying.
But we are here. We got through it, and we did a broadcast. So praise the Lord for that. Thank you for your prayers. Continue to keep us in prayer. Keep me in prayer as I carry on doing lots of different stuff with the museum project and running the UK ministry, as well as now doing a doctorate. So all sorts of interesting stuff going on there. Keep Diane and John in prayer down in Australia and all the work they're doing. And continue to support us where you can. Thank you all very much, everybody. We will see you next week, where hopefully we will have returned to some form of normality. And we'll also do a few more updates, because we're going to have some meetings this week about the future of creation conversations and where we'd like to go with it. So do send us your feedback. That is useful, but we've got some good ideas, and some good ideas for even a new kind of podcast to go out. So lots of different thoughts there, but continue to keep us in prayer. Continue to support the ministry. Thank you all very much. Goodbye and God bless. Diana, Sam, any last words?
Fish. That's the last word.
Fish. Excellent. Diane, you?
Yes. Thank you that we managed to triumph over the technological problems, and we hope you've been blessed by what you've seen and heard. And please join us again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm glad that we actually managed to sort it out in the end, because I think we were all. I remember I was trying to log on. I was just like, "Oh, that must be my," because I've just recently updated to Windows 11. So I thought that, oh no, my computer's. I'm gonna have to do it on my phone. And then I saw you sent me a message. I was like, oh no, what's happened? Oh no, my Wi-Fi's not working. I was like, oh no, you've asked me to let everyone in. I can't get in now. And then I was just like, hang on, I can't get on my phone either. And then we realised the whole thing's gone down. And then we scrambling like headless chickens trying to sort something out last minute. And then you had the genius idea of using Zoom. So I was going to suggest that we do like a Zoom call, and I'd broadcast it through like a capture software or something, a really janky way of doing it. But
now they seem to work. I have with the university subscriptions, you get lots of other perks, and so one of them is Zoom. So praise the Lord with that. Anyway, we'll catch you later, everybody. Thank you very much. See you next week for hopefully a normal Creation Conversations, and we'll have some guests on soon and lots of cool stuff. So catch you next week. Goodbye. God bless. We'll see you later.
Goodbye.
should we wave again, or?
No, that's ended. I was just waiting. It's now